Thank you, Robert. Thank you and good morning. It's great to be here in Amsterdam. I live in Washington, D.C., and I've been working with our new administration on identity issues. So it's great to be here in Amsterdam. I'd like to talk to you today about trust and the economics of identity, and deliberately taking those two words and juxtaposing them to accomplish what I'd like to do today with you, is to provoke you and point out to you places where I think the issues of trust and the economic models of identity are most salient and most important. This is the economic model of the personally identifying information today. It is a trade where we trade data about us for goods and services. Bruce Schneier, a noted security architect, says that the business model of the internet to date has been surveillance. Companies surveil us in order to sell us stuff. Governments surveil us in order to protect us. So this notion of surveillance is now giving way to a new set of economic models that require trust. What I have in my mind about trust is the reliability and repeatability of the experience. And today, the synchronization of technology tools, like the ones in the exhibit hall to our left, and governance rules are required in order to propel our systems forward, whether that's a governmental system or a business. We have to synchronize technology tools and business and governmental regulation rules. Today, data about us, identity data, is a commodity. Many of us don't like that. Many of us find that problematic. But that's the fact, that we can no longer think about the control of data about us. That simply is not possible. And we find that the control of data about our companies is now subject to commoditization in a way that coal provided the British Revolution, or rice or pork bellies are commodities. Data is a commodity and it's building empires. But data is also problematic for the architects in this room and your clients and customers. At one time, we want to take as much data about our customers, our clients, and our partners as possible and safely secure that data behind our firewalls. Not so much. At the same time, if we take data in about our customers, about our clients, about our partners, we can no longer assure them that we can keep it safe. So the challenge for many of the architects in the room is, how do we find a balance? How do we secure the data that is the commodity, the feedstock of these economic engines, and at the same time take advantage of what it provides us? The other thing that's changing in our world is that the old model was that we looked to governments to provide the regulation or the frameworks for how data or commodity is to be used. We now live in a global economy, an ecosystem, where companies like these cannot be ignored. They regulate, for the large part, how data as a commodity is exploited, how it's monetized, how it's distributed. I think it was Sweden that talked about naming an ambassador to Silicon Valley, noting that a relationship with companies like these is every bit as important for a government as a relationship with another government. Dave Birch thinks about identity as the new money. So we're moving away from monetary instruments of cash and instead creating a new class of commodities that has value, that can be traded, that can be built upon. And the World Economic Forum further expands this so that we're now talking about not only the power of personally identifying information, but also the data about what constitutes a legal entity. How can we identify the ownership and the provenance of an asset? So the identity of things, the identity of organizations, as well as personally identifying information, is now in the mix. And the result of that is this tremendous expansion of what we've been calling the identity ecosystem. In that identity ecosystem, we're seeing new revenue models emerge. And interestingly, these revenue models are not only being innovated by private sector, but also the public sector. Many of you know about the Estonian model, and it's essentially monetizing an attribute called citizenship. A remarkable development when you think about the power of data, the power of attributes now combined with a government that acts as a root of trust. The other thing that's happening beyond data being commoditized is the identity ecosystem being consolidated. So we have, in the case of Microsoft, spending, $23 billion to buy LinkedIn, which has 480 million identities. Verizon, a large global player in security, now has amassed not only AOL assets, but Yahoo assets. So these companies have billions of identities available to them, or rather, data about identities, data about things, data that we provide through LinkedIn, through Facebook, through a bunch of social media outlets. So this notion of commoditization of data, consolidation in the industry, really puts pressure on the kind of work that all of you do in synchronizing the notions of trust in these new economic models. What I'd like to suggest to you comes from a business mentor of mine, Steve Case, the founder of AOL. And what Steve says is the first wave of the internet was simply getting online, of being available, creating a digital identity for yourself, receiving mail. The second wave of the internet, according to Case, is this notion of we want to buy things online. We want to socially connect with people. But the third wave, the most important one, and the one that all of you in this room will be dealing with for the rest of our careers, is the third wave where we begin to do high-value transactions online. Transactions involving healthcare or finances or governmental services. And by definition, we now are working with government in a new way. So let's look at some examples in this new third wave of the internet. I'd like to give you 4 examples of where the third wave of the economics of identity, trust, and the engagement of government and regulators really constitutes a new set of value, higher value transactions on the internet, transactions that require government involvement, that are powered by trust in order to transact at a very high volume, high velocity, and variety of transactions. One example is the Light Test Project. And I find it fascinating as a European-led initiative that builds on something that works, builds on the DNS system, the infrastructure of the internet, the trusted framework for the internet. This group of companies, led by Fraunhofer, under a grant, will be experimenting with trying to build on top of the DNS infrastructure so that we can engage both corporate and governmental entities, individuals and nonprofits in a transparent set of transactions in a new environment. What's fascinating to me about the Light Test Project is how it calls out for trust. Again, we think about trust as reliability and repeatability of an experience where we can trust that transaction. So by anchoring transactions, a new trust framework, on top of something that we use every day, the DNS system, the light test project will experiment, will have pilots, and will allow for a new set of value in this third wave, value transactions that we don't see today. So light test really talks about a single global anchor of trust, a European example to collectively look at Europe not only as a market, but as a global player and platform, every bit as powerful as the ones that I referenced earlier. So what will be happening over the next 3 years is that the light test project will be interfacing with its global community, not only experimenting within the European Union and the single market, but making sure that it acts transparently so that it can be integrated as it is built. So the light test project will use every measure we can to provide for the transparency and the collaboration, not only among the European players that I pointed out, but also connecting with other global players and platforms. Another example of this third wave set of pilots and programs is the CEF project. In some ways, it takes a very simple proposition that I want to open a bank account in France and then move money to Germany, etc. How can we make that as free of friction and as trusted as possible? We have to involve technology tools like the OpenID Connect standard, like the kind of tool sets that the companies in the other room are talking about. How can we combine that with a set of relationships with regulators that cross borders? So the CEF project, again, is another example of this third wave of high-value transactions that can drive new opportunities through the use of data and the leveraging of existing platforms. Here's another example of this third wave that OIX is involved with. The International Airline Transport Association has a vision. They too have a one identity program. And their vision is that they want to make all of us who travel through airports have a seamless journey where we walk through the airport without being interrupted, where the security measures, the business transactions, all are happening around us, happen before we get to the airport. It's an enormously complex undertaking because the regulation in all these countries and the collaboration between the competing airlines is further complicated by new security measures. So with IATA's One Identity program, like light tests, we're going to be piloting and experimenting with new biometric tools and technologies. We'll be working with government security organizations as well as the travel industry to come up with a trust framework so that the security needs, the protection of privacy, and the flow, the transactional flow of passengers through airports on a global basis is assured. Here's another example. The gov.uk Verify program, which is a public-private partnership where the UK government is trying to increase the engagement of its citizens online. In order to do that, government has to verify that you are who you say you are in order to provide you these new higher value services. Governments are being driven to do this because of the pressure on budgets. The millennial generation is requiring contact with government online. So in order to make gov.uk work on a national basis for Her Majesty's government, a private sector marketplace of identity providers has to be recreated, has to be regulated and recreated as well. So the reuse of a government verified identity in a private sector marketplace is at the heart of the gov.uk Verify program. It requires trust, transparency, and the seamless integration of new technology tools and open identity standards. So you have, in the case of Light Test, of CEF, of the travel industry's One Identity program, and the UK government's gov.uk Verify, experiments in this new third wave of identity online and the value and economic models that are emerging online. The role of OIX, the organization that I lead, is really simple. The traditional definition of a stakeholder is when a group of people are making bets, and one person has to be trusted to hold the money while the race is on. So OIX, as a nonprofit, a technology agnostic, public and private sector organization, has a global ambition to be a stakeholder so that we can help projects be developed, pilots be examined, and ultimately for trust frameworks to be made more transparent and available to a global community. The Open Identity Exchange, the organization that I lead, is really a team of rivals. Not only do we have rival companies, but also rival industries, whether it be retail in the Timpson stores, or Barclays in banking, or the International Airline Group in transportation. What we're trying to do is assemble a cross-sector approach to identity. What we're trying to do is promote transparency in these new frameworks, because with transparency comes trust. And with trust, we are allowed that economic engine, that rapid, high volume, high velocity, and variety of transactions to occur in this new third wave context. So these companies and small and developing developers are joining together and beginning to really experiment with this notion of a trust framework, where the terms and conditions of a multi-party set of players, both public and private sectors, can be made available so that we can see the movement of data about us, the commoditization and monetization of data about the things that we own or the things that we operate, and the organizations that we interact with. We can expose those terms and conditions to the scrutiny of the marketplace and allow for trusted transactions to occur in this new third wave context. Two other things that I'd like to mention in closing that OIX is doing is that we have an ambition to create what we call a registry. It's a registry of trust frameworks where we want to be able to have, again, available for global scrutiny, the trust frameworks from the pharmaceutical industry, from the technology industry, from the airline industry. We want to be able to centralize and aggregate those multi-party agreements in one place, because that's what is required in the third wave, and that's what is missing today. Today, the commoditization of data about us and the monetization of that data is hidden behind opaque terms of service. Our contention and my belief is that we need to open that up to the sunlight and allow for the transparency that can drive the trust in these new economic models, these new approaches to high-value transactions, as we'll be experimenting with here in Europe in the CEF project in Light Test. So I invite you to take a further look at these remarkable new pilots and projects that will be occurring here in Europe. I'd like to invite your questions and a further discussion about how can we further make these new monetization models, the new commoditization of data, be more trustworthy, and how we can better understand the shift of power on a global basis from nation states to multinational platform providers. We live in interesting times, and those of us that live in Washington, D.C. are particularly interested in these times, where we have a radical re-entrenchment of the views of the U.S. and its participation in these international frameworks. So together, we want to do one other thing. We'd like to experiment with what we at OIX call the identity channel, to aggregate the videos and the content that all of you are producing and allow in one place for people to educate themselves, not only about goods and services, but about the agreements and frameworks that constitute these new economic models in the internet, that are the fabric of this internet identity ecosystem that's so rapidly expanding around us. Data not only about ourselves, but data about things, data about the organizations that we are part of. So through the identity channel, through our registry, we believe that we can provide the trust that powers this new set of opportunities in this particularly security conscious and rightfully security conscious environment that we're in. We're seeing the fabric of our identity ecosystem degrade, and it's time to take action to combat that. I look forward to our discussion, and I hope this has been a helpful introduction to what I'm sure is going to be a rich set of conversations over the course of the day. Thank you very much.